Welcome. I would love to know how old your child is. So if you are watching us live or in the replay, if you can type in the age of your child. We're going to be talking about transition programs for students 18 to 21. But guess what? Even if your child is in elementary school, I encourage you to watch our show today, because what you're going to be learning about, there are several of these strategies like person-centered planning that we'll mention today that you can use at the elementary school level too. So if you are new to our show, I am Charmaine Tanner. I'm a parent, a retired teacher, and I host this weekly Facebook Live show. My son Dylan, who happens to have Down syndrome, is 30 years old. And we always had the value of Dylan being included in high school. And he always was, preschool through high school. He was fully included in general ed classes. Well, when Dylan started seeing his brother and sister applying for colleges, he was like, that's what you do. After high school, you go to college. And I was saying, I don't know, Dylan. I don't know if we can find a college that will take somebody with Down syndrome. And mind you, this was, like back in the early 2000s. So there weren't a lot of post-secondary opportunities for kids. But in our high school, the typical transition program was students would walk through the graduation ceremony, not get their diploma so they could still get special ed services, but then they went back to the high school the following year as a super senior. They would take pretty much segregated classes in the morning, and the afternoon they would do something in the community. Well, Dylan didn't want to be a super senior. It was like, no, you graduate from high school and you leave. So instead, what we did is we were able to work with the school district in the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs. And Dylan used his transition age program when he was 18 to 21 to actually be on campus at the university and take college classes. So I want to encourage you as a parent of a young child or a parent of a middle schooler or a high schooler that we always want to make sure we listen to our children's voices and the dreams that they have and help them achieve those. And we have the perfect guest today because Stephen Hinkle is with us, and he is going to be sharing his perception and his insights about what we need to do and what kinds of changes we can make with the transition program for secondary age students. I met Stephen years ago at the Peak Parent Center Inclusion Conference. I've always loved hearing him speak. He's been a guest on our show before. And so welcome, Stephen. I'm so glad that you're here with us again today.
Yes, welcome, Charmaine. I'm going to be talking a little bit about transition, and this is PowerPoint's the longer version, so we'll be adjusting for time. So if I skip over a couple of slides, it's just because we're for the time we have today. But I'm going to talk about what this is like, and I'm now a PhD student here at Chapman University, and I graduated with my master's years ago. You can see me graduating there, and I have a BA in computer science and a master's in special ed and stuff like that. So as you can see, I'm going up very high on the education scale. I'm also an international speaker. I've traveled all over, and including to Australia, as you can see here. I'm my own guardian. I drive. And I'm living on my own today in Orange, California. I'm joining you from Orange, California. And historically, the transition pathways have been, we've done a lot of low-end jobs and things like that historically, and as Charmaine mentioned, and we need to eventually stop marginalizing people with disabilities and instead let them become what they want to be in society. And one of the things is we've made assumptions that they would just learn functional skills and not graduate, and training for entry-level jobs, and preparing them for living in a group home. But the reality is that expectation really built for today's time? I don't think so. And as such, I believe that that model is actually going toward the wrecking ball, because things really have shifted. More and more people with disabilities today are going on to community life or living in the communities. We're also continuing education beyond the 12th grade, as a growing number of them are going on to college or other post-secondary. The lifestyles are changing. Millennials have a different culture than before. So really, we're looking at a different time, but yet the system was designed for an era that no longer exists. So how best can we prepare for this change? And as a result, we really have to think about how sustainable this is when more and more people with disabilities are diversifying their career paths. People are dating, people are getting married, people are having their own kids with disabilities, more and more going to college after high school. So there's a lot of changes in the trends. And then the days of institutionalization is now obsolete. So I'm going to go on to the new model is also about autonomy. It's about letting people with disabilities make their own decisions in life and be able to lead a life comparable to their peers these days. So again, some of the new regulations are now requiring more autonomy, which was very different than the controlled model where a group home controlled everything they did. And then, like, some of the new regulations are things like the person with disabilities getting a key so they can go in and out, access to food, no restrictions on visitors, and be able to set their own schedule and do things on their own as an individual, which is, again, a big shift nowadays for home and community-based services. And then we also face other challenges. Have you ever noticed how high the rents are in many cities?
Oh, I know. And I'm sure you guys see it in California, right?
Yes, but in many cities across the country, it already is above the asset caps for Medicaid and SSI. And then we're also facing changes in the job market, because a lot of those jobs that used to be able to get, even if you didn't have a diploma, are going away. And our retail sector is going through a massive downsizing right now alone as an industry. And just in California where I live, these are just the average rents in some of the cities. Just look at how high they are.
Huh. Yes, that's pretty amazing.
And then the other thing is, historically, we've sent people like to become cashiers or thrift store workers in these transition programs in the back rooms of high school and things like that, where we've taught them to stock shelves. But what's happening is that if you notice how many of those jobs are in the high risk category for automation, cooks are in there, cashiers, things, hosts, things like that are in there, and a high risk of robots taking the job and a high risk of things, but yet that's what we've historically trained people in the transition. And then I'm going to skip ahead in a minute, but one of the things I think is very important to realize is historically we've sent people to malls and we sent people to grocery stores. But if you look at how many retail stores are closing, and actually I just read it's now from 6,000, it's up now to 12,000 since I built this PowerPoint in 2019, and they estimate another 75,000 closed. If you look at the pictures, those malls are not healthy, aren't they? They look dead, right?
Right.
Like zombie apocalypse. But so again, we're losing a lot of those jobs right now. If you look at how many stores have closed and these things are gone bankrupt, it's really telling, isn't it? And there's even some more ones that happened since I made this PowerPoint in the last few days. And then what happens is when this happens, they take on other things or get demolished. And then a lot of thrift stores have been closing as well, which is historically where they've sent people for transition. So again, we have to adapt to a new job market, to a new landscape out there. And then we, as we go forward, we're going to face some things for the 21st century with all the environmental factors in the job market. And then, so the reality is with these budget cuts and then self-determination based service delivery, which means that people with disabilities in the program's new way of doing it eventually will be able to choose their own vendors and be a fiscal manager, be able to hire their own people. So again, everything's changing here. And then I'm going to go on here. So how we prepare for all these changes is going to require new advice and new and person-centered planning, and it's going to think about it differently and to really think about the ways at all the different levels we have to adapt and so forth. And the reality is transition is about choosing one's path in life to determine which way they want to take it from this point forward and really leading a normal life. And think about this. What the best way to start planning for transition is to think about what path they want to take 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road, and say, how do we get there? How do we plan? What kinds of things do that person want to do in their years after high school? And really think about what it takes to get there. It's about balancing your life. It's about making sure that it have a quality life here. So reality is the new pathways could consist of a bunch of areas here. We're going to talk about some of them in a little bit more detail. One of which is going to college, and the next is careers, of course, and then the adult life issues. So we'll be talking about some of those things.
And Stephen, I was going to tell people that if they want to get training notes from today's session, all they have to do is type your name, Stephen, in the chat box, and they'll get a message from my bot. But that way we can make sure that they get.
I don't see anything in the chat box on my end. So
yeah, so if people can do that, and then these are the comments that have been coming in. So Jan is with us, Greta is with us live. We have some other live viewers if you want to say hi. So
hi.
Stephen and I can greet you.
Can you set up so I can see what's coming into the chat box?
Yeah, I'm not let me, yeah. Why don't you keep going and I'll work on trying to fix that for you.
Yep. But the thing I want everybody to understand is at the high school level, you need to think twice before saying, oh, I'm going to not get a diploma or not take academics for credit. Because for those that are capable of getting a diploma or doing some academic classes for credit, it's more power to them in terms of a job potential, in terms of a thing. And I think that people need to understand that we should not just make it just because somebody has a disability. In fact, when I was in high school, I even took AP Physics and AP Computer Science and Calculus and Japanese and some of the other advanced classes, believe it or not. And I managed to graduate at 18, and that is always an option. You don't have to stay until 21 or 22 if you don't want to.
Exactly. Yeah, that's important.
So again, the way to plan is functional skills should be last resort. If one's capable of more, go the other route. And I think it's time to bring back some of the hands-on classes in high schools that have been taken out of the years. But again, I'm going to talk now about a couple of the different pathways, because depending upon what pathway you take determines what options you'll have for funding your transition. But at the same time, it also impacts whether you can get into a 4-year college and other things or not. And there's trade-offs to going different ways. Actually, it's not just historically we've emphasized keep the funding, but delay your graduation, which you can still do. But sometimes there are advantages the other way of graduating on time as well. So the way to determine this is to determine whether they're going to graduate or get a fake diploma. Do they want to pursue additional schooling, whether it be college or trade or whatever? What role do they want in society? Do they want a low-end entry-level job? Do they want middle-class job? Do they want what field? Are they looking at going into? Where are they going to live in the near future? And some of their skill set for they need support for an independent living. Because again, you need to start planning as if the parents someday are going to pass away and we're in a deinstitutionalized generation, which means chances are going to be living in the community somewhere when that happens, and what other goals they might have. And then some of the pathways are They can graduate with one's high school class, of course, at age 18. Uh, take extra years if they want to slow it down or not do this, or they can do it in another setting, like, for example, their adult years be on a college campus, as Charmaine mentioned, or vocational setting, or things like. So there's a variety of options. The advantage to a real diploma for those that will do it is it will get you into a 4-year university directly from high school. It'll also mean you don't have to take remedial courses if you go on to college. But at the same time, it also means you lose your funding through the school system for your years of transition if you graduate. And again, and then of course, it's more difficult to do the academic credit, but I recommend this if someone wants to go to college to consider this track and they're capable of doing it. Extra years, you can, that if you want to keep your funding through the school district or go through their transition program or your academic slower, you can. But it means if you don't finish, you don't get a diploma, and then sometimes you might not, and then you may have to do remedial courses. So this is recommended if getting a diploma is not important to you, or they want a slower pace or things like that. Or you can do your years outside of the high school campus, like if somebody wants to vocational train or community access programs or things like day programs, things like that. But it has the same drawbacks as if you didn't graduate. So there's a lot of, so you really have to consider your three options carefully. Then, of course, some people go after that, funding in other ways and so forth. But I'm going to talk just a little bit about college here. College is about the support. They really vary depending upon if you want a big campus, a small campus, things like that. And it's a good idea to just look at the different campuses and see what types of things they offer, what kinds of support you can get through their disabilities, whether things, what the requirements are to graduate. Do you prefer a small campus or a big campus, public or private? Of course, some colleges are harder to get in than others, and usually you have to meet all the requirements to get in. That doesn't change if you have a disability, so you need to keep that in mind, and so forth. And then usually community colleges are a little bit easier to get in. Sometimes the workload's a little bit harder if you go to a 4-year, but the advantage to going to a 4-year is that you can get more advanced degrees like bachelor's, master's, and doctorates. So again, there's trade-offs and stuff like that. And then again, to get into college, usually you need a high GPA and specific courses and a diploma and then an essay, and then sometimes there's tests you have to pass and things like that. And then I'm going to skip over this one. You can get accommodations for disabilities on those tests, but I need to optimize for time. But there's really, college requires a lot of independent level work. So you want to consider that before you apply. It may mean writing reports on your own, going to the library to do research, arranging your own time, arranging your own accommodations, things like that. You really have to do, because there's a lot of autonomy. It's very different from high school.
I know. And Stephen, one of the things that Dylan found out in college was, one time he called me, and he said, my class is done. And I'm like, really? You've only been there a little bit. And he said, no, the teacher never showed up and everybody left. So the class is done. And he was used to high school where you like sit in that classroom until the bell rings, right? Well, in college, I guess, it's different, right?
There's no bell clock in college.
So, yeah, so just those little nuances, there's such a difference between high school and college,
Yeah. And then again, some people audit classes if they're not sure what they're capable of. That is a way to tell, but sometimes the drawback is if you audit, you don't get credit for it, even if you pass. So I recommend, if you need to try out, audit is an option, but if you know you can pass it, I'd take it for credit. That's how I recommend. And then, of course, the accommodations. Colleges don't provide everything that you can get at K-12. Like, there's no testing, there's no psych evaluations, there's no things like that. But what you can get at a college generally are test accommodations, or rooms accessible, or interpreters. Sometimes they'll provide like a sign interpreter or things like that, or usually some reading and writing help, or sometimes you can take longer and do things, or things like that. So that's important.
So, Stephen, like now you're still a student, right? You're going for your PhD. And when you think back to like when you were in your master's program or your bachelor's, how did you approach professors and tell them about accommodations? Because I think
I went through the disability services at the college. And if they approve accommodations, then all professors, when you notify them of this, are required to honor what the Disability Services Office says you get.
Okay, good. Yeah, so that's a good person to network. And
like, one of the things I have even at Chapman is I have very poor handwriting. So I have use of my laptop, but most of the other students use laptops too. So it doesn't seem to be a problem.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yep. So there's some different things here. And then, of course, some people learn trades too. If they don't decide not to go to college, sometimes they learn things through adult ed or career tech ed, or other things like how do you fix a car, how do you cook things, or how do you design things, or things like that. There are people that learn trades as well. But the reality is people need to think about what kind of career they're going to have. And obviously that's going to be, chances are they're going to be working for 40 to 50 years. If you think about from when they finish college to when they retire, unless, of course, they end up being like a stay-at-home parent or something like that. But they'll usually have to change careers pretty often. Statistics are showing like millennials often change jobs every few years. It's not like the old days of a job for one company till you retire, which is no longer the case. And we often make assumptions that, a lot of people start out as fast food or things, but reality is we need to start thinking in a variety and diversifying the career paths of people with disabilities and to really think about where their talents can be used in the workforce. And we often, historically, we've sent them to sheltered workshops, which exploit people by paying them much lower than the minimum wage, which is awful. So I recommend if someone's capable of more than a sheltered workshop job to go for it. And we again need to focus on competitive employment and things like that. And the reality is people with disabilities can work in a wide variety of careers. Things like to look at their talents, their strengths. The best way to determine a career for someone, where they should be looking, is to start with what they're good at, not what they're not so good at, but what they are very good at. Where is their passion? What is their strength? What is their talent? What is their gift? What is their goal? What are their skill set? What are their abilities? Make a list of all of those things and then see in the workforce where those skills and gifts and talents can be actually put to use, and note those jobs. And then from that list of jobs or places, then see what industry or career field seems appealing to the person. For example, if somebody's good with technology, they could be a programmer, they could be a technician, they could be someone who types, they could be a computer graphic designer, they could be a video game debugger, they could be someone who sets up computers in a school, for example. But then see which ones more appeal to the person. Or if somebody likes animals, they could be maybe a zookeeper, they could be a dog walker, they could be working at an animal shelter, they could be someone who feeds them on a farm. There's just a lot of options there. If they like airplanes, whether they want to be a pilot or a flight attendant or someone who repairs the plane or someone who takes their tickets or serves the meals to people on the plane or whatever. Again, there's a lot of choices. You really have to think about this from that sort of thing and look at where they're good at, where their strengths can be used.
And then Stephen, excuse me. I also heard a speaker once, and it might have been at a peak conference, but talk about sometimes we think of what our kids are interested in, and then we start looking at careers around that. But there's sometimes our kids are interested in something like music or, video games or something, but they don't necessarily want a job in that. They still want to keep that as their leisure activity. So I thought that was a great piece of advice, that I think it is important. We want to look at our kids' strengths and their gifts and their interests, because a lot of us, those are the types of jobs we're going to enjoy. But then to talk to our children and say, is this something that you would like a job with, or do you want to just keep this as your hobby,
That's an option too, but I think we need to not overlook the possibility for those that do want to make a career out of it to do this. And what I want to see people get away from is the notion that they stuff them with fast food when they really want a career in, let's say, aviation or something. The system needs to change their ways in that regard. And yes, some people want things as a hobby too, but we should look at both of those, whether a career or a hobby. But certainly we should not be sticking them with careers that they don't want to be in, or occupations they don't like, just because it's convenient for the system.
Here, here. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. And I see more students with disabilities really being successful in entrepreneur kinds of jobs, that they invent themselves or create, versus taking a fast food job or some of those typical things that our students are offered, and really expand those opportunities and the
Yep,
possibilities.
correct. That I agree with 100%.
Yeah, and
And
Greta says everyone is capable. Oops, let me bring her comment up here. Greta says everyone is capable of more than a sheltered workshop.
that's true. And
And
I believe
Cheryl,
you're absolutely right, Greta.
yeah, and
Um,
Cheryl had a question, Stephen. She said, "Are there transition assessments that you can suggest that identify those strengths and passions?"
yeah, I'm sure there are. I don't know if I'm off the head because I don't do that kind of assessment work, but I basically suggest that you look at where someone's good with, whether good with their hands, good with their knowledge of things and whatever, and then I also recommend that people look at what they're wanting to expand on in terms of their knowledge. Like, for example, if someone wants to learn more about something, that's important that they should explore that possibility. Of course, it's going to be harder to get the schooling to become a doctor as opposed to someone who boxes things for Amazon. But again, if that's their goal, to become a doctor, and they really believe that they're capable of learning that advanced level knowledge, give them the chance to try. That's what I believe. And again, some I recommend people research what it takes to get there and then decide whether they're going to pursue it. And then again, sometimes if they really want a high paying job, they need to realize that, oh, they might have to go to graduate school on a 4 credit track, or advanced level knowledge or things like that. And then again, there's a wide variety of sectors that people can get jobs in. Again, and there's just many more that aren't even listed, but there's a bunch of different fields out there. And the other challenge is persons with autism sometimes struggle with interviews, and sometimes interviews sometimes look at nonverbal cues more than verbal ones and things like that as well. So sometimes this is a challenge. So recommend avoiding paths they don't like or can't perform well, and to try through things. And again, they say that some of the research is showing that persons with the average person in the workforce today is going to have 15 to 20 careers, according to things. So,
That's a lot.
and then of course, this is something else we often get hooked up on, is we often make assumptions that, oh, they have to stay in poverty to get like SSI and SSDI and Medicaid and Section 8. But if you stay under that, you get free benefits. But and in some cases, but the asset caps are extremely low at $2,000 or $3,000 for couples. Although the state of Florida, I read, is actually changing that because the cost of living is becoming so high. But there are advantages to also going the living wage route even though you may lose benefits for some of those programs if you do, like, for example, having to pay for your health care or pay market rate for housing. But if somebody's offered $60,000 a year or $80,000 or even $100,000 a year and would rather have the higher quality of life, at some point you need to decide, do you want to take this even though it's going to mean, oh, I have to pay full price for my housing, or I'll have a deductible if I go to the doctor, or things like that. But sometimes it's worth it to take the higher quality of life.
Oh, I agree.
And that's something we've overlooked in the disability thing. And we often need to consider this and to understand that this kind of thing. And one of the things we often don't think about is what's going to happen when the parents pass away and so forth. I'm going to jump ahead because this is something for time here, but think about, and now I'm going to talk about adulthood. And becoming an adult is often something else that we forget about. And that means having more responsibility and be able to go places, be able to arrange things as you need them, to have privacy, legal rights, self-advocate, voting. And I'll just stay on this slide for a little bit. I'm sorry to jump ahead, but I wanted to optimize for time here. But again, we often, historically, we've told people with disabilities to conserve or take away their adult rights. But nowadays, to navigate the new landscape, I encourage parents to allow their kids to have as many rights as possible that they can responsibly handle. And this may put some parents out of their comfort zone with parents with disabilities, going up to voting in an election, or being able to own their own property, or be able to manage their own money, or obtain credit, or be able to go out after curfew, or learn how to drive the car, or go out on a date, or have sexual relations, or some of these grown-up privileges we often have overlooked for so long when it comes to people with disabilities. And nowadays, I believe the new model is going to require taking a much more empathetic view of their kid with a disability getting the chance to experience. And again, this means not over-shielding them for some of these things, because reality is that parents are going to pass away, and that taking some risk in life is natural. And I'm not saying that one shouldn't evaluate the risks of what they're doing. They should, but taking them is there. And I think getting the chance to try some grown-up things is important, and to embrace the dignity of risk and so forth. And this is another important topic, guardianship. We often have how many of you have heard that we often are told, oh, their kid's about to turn 18, go take their rights away by a school, or by their rehabilitation, or by the disability services, right? How many, you've heard of that, Charmaine, haven't you?
Yes, and that's, I think, a big discussion now, as far as, and I think also in like IEP meetings, do teachers and staff really encourage parents to become a guardian without looking at, other kinds of, models like shared decision making, or having limited guardianship. I mean, there are a lot more options today than just becoming your child's
Yeah.
full guardian.
And when you take one's rights away, it's very difficult for someone to get them back.
Right.
So we need to evaluate, is it really necessary to take them away in the first place? Or is it better to let the person become a true adult in some or all of them? And some of the things that can impact are the access to money, their property, whether they can live on their own, sexuality, marriage, being able to raise a child, being able to sign your own name, medical, be able to stand trial if you have. One of the consequences if you're not conserved is you will be presumed competent to stand trial in court. That's one of the drawbacks, but it also is a responsibility of being an adult and be able to travel independently, be able to serve on a jury. Those are just some of the things you can take away. But I think as many rights as one can have is better, and to make sure that think twice before you even do this. There are alternatives as well, like a power of attorney or partial or things like that. I recommend, or someone's capable of being a full adult, maybe it's not even necessary at all to take anyone's their rights away, but like I became a full adult and so forth. And then where it may be necessary is like if they have serious medical issues, or if they're unable to make adult decisions, or seriously just diminished, or their life's terminal, or things like that. Sometimes it might be necessary, but we need to stop rubber stamping, taking them away at 18 just to sign an IEP form, which is how the schools promote it. Instead, we need to look at alternatives. Now I'm going to go on to community living here. And persons with disabilities can live in the community if they want to, and then be able to rent or own their own place. And some live in dorms when they're in college. I did, and it really was a good opportunity for learning this as well. But there are some drawbacks, like people break the rules and stuff. But reality, independent living is about the skills of like cleaning and housekeeping and being able to cook your own meals and pay bills and budget your money and take your trash out and things when you need to do that, and get along with who you're wanting to live with. And then make sure you know how to care for yourself, like when you go to the doctor and things like that. And then and be able to fill out a health form, and then things go to specialists and things of that nature. And be prepared as well for disasters, and understand what to do if like the power goes out or you're ordered to evacuate or things like that. It's especially true to prepare if a person doesn't drive. And then there's housing things, like sometimes it's challenging, like to find things that are affordable, or employer there are landlords that take Section 8 and things like that. And the problem is with SSI is the amount you get is so low. A lot of people can't afford to live on that, and because a lot of times you'll need about 3 to 4 times the rent to qualify for an apartment or a mortgage. And then a lot of times you'll need rental history and things, security deposits, Sometimes if you don't have good rental history, sometimes they'll want higher deposits. But there are ways of getting help if someone needs help to live through supported living services through your disability agency. Like they can help with paying someone's bills every month, or cooking meals if they need to, or live in roommates if they need to, have someone there watching them all the time, or things like that. So it's a very interesting different levels of that sort of thing. And this is some of the skills that I recommend. And there's a lot of ways one can learn the skills to be on their own. They can take home economics if their high school still has that. They can learn these skills at home, which they can practice, like cleaning up or cooking a meal or something while they're still living with their parents, or learning them from friends, or other ways as well. There's many different ways one can learn the skills to be on their own. And then getting around, a lot of people with disabilities take public transit, like the bikes or the buses or the subway, or taking the things like that and so forth. And then there's people who also, some people who learn to drive, like I have my driver's license and so forth, and I recommend it's best to learn there a little bit at a time, and then find a good teacher and stuff. And then there's ways of getting accommodations, like if somebody needs adaptive controls or things like that as well. And then you can get around by the bus and the trolley and stuff like that. And then it's also a good idea to learn how to get around if you're traveling, like on a vacation, through the airport system and things like that. But there's a fourth piece to transition. And this part gets overlooked. We talked about jobs, we talked about college and stuff, but there's a fourth piece that you need to consider. Like, for example, what's important to that person? Where's their place in the community? What do they like to do for fun, for exercise, for their hobbies, for their personal lives, for their friendships, for their dating life, do they want to someday get married? Do they want to someday start a family? These are questions that get overlooked. And I'll just give you a couple of tips on that. Like, what do you like to do for fun? Like, do you want to go to the amusement park, or go bowling, or go out clubbing at night, or go out to eat, or go shopping, or go host other people over to your house, or the plays, or some vacations, or travel things, or a variety of other things as well. And I think it's important that you think about keeping in shape and getting some exercise. Have a plan for that. And to understand about hosting and things like that, and the social scene, the etiquette rules, and understand about how to eat correctly and things, and have relationships, like as people get older, their parents will have less of a role in this, and their friends will be more of a role. And then eventually, when parents start passing away, it's more going to come from their friends and others in the community. And I think this is a little bit controversial, but I think people with disabilities we need to also start thinking about courtship and dating, and making sure that happens, and to understand what happens at night, or what they do in private, or things like that. This is a topic that it's a little controversial, and it gets overlooked a lot. But we need to make sure that people with disabilities have the chance to fall in love, to learn how to date correctly, and to make sure that it's a myth that people with disabilities don't date. It's a myth that they don't want relationships. It's a myth that somebody nonverbal can't be in a relationship. I actually do know people who are nonverbal who are in them. And I also know some people with disabilities who've had their own children and raised a family. So again, some of the skills I think we need to cover is how does one ask someone out? How does one read the cues of flirting? How do you ask to go beyond friendship, deeper level? Someday the goal of sharing the master bedroom, and understand the positive sides, because historically the sex education we've focused on the negative side, but for persons with autism and other disabilities, sometimes they take that literally and don't ever try it on their own as a result. And then the thing I want people to get out of this is for them to start thinking about who they might want to live their lives with, like the age range, they pretty or not, their intelligence, are they introverted or extroverted, are they have things in common, day versus night, things like that, and how to decipher the cryptic messages of love, which are sometimes very hard to decipher for people who don't read nonverbal. And
so, Stephen, how do you think parents and teachers, when kids are younger, can help with these? Like, what do you think are, good strategies? I know teachers that do role modeling, for, conversations and, things, social situations like that. But like, what else do you think is really helpful? So
I think a balanced sexual education would be very helpful, and not just the negative side, but the positive side as well. Like, how do you build a relationship? How do you read the subtle cues? Maybe some role play, some practicing of this kind of thing to understand, like, when I was younger, I didn't even know what was happening at night or on the weekends or or what they were saying over the phone late at night in their rooms, or someday how to make an advance to somebody. Or I'm not trying to solicit this, but I'm just explaining it from the side of knowledge that might not be in someone's memory. I don't want to offend anyone here, but to really understand and the anatomy and chemistry process of relationships, which I got almost no instruction on when I was younger. And I think that would have been really helpful if I would have known things like, how does this form, which sometimes can be harder if you're not an expert in socialization, for one. And really to understand, like, and they're often taught, oh, you don't do these things, but in reality, people do. But to understand how that happens would be very helpful. And then I think people need to understand that relationships can enable happiness. And a lot of times the system has been focused on paid roommates historically. But I think what's better is if one can find the person that they're in love with and naturally support each other. It costs our government nothing and probably ends up even better for the persons together. and this is often a thing that trend, and I think I actually do know some with autism who've gotten married. I also know some people with disabilities who've raised their own children. So I want to say that it's more common than people think, but we need to. And if somebody's going to have a family, to make sure they're financially sufficient and how to read into them and give them nutrition and to make sure they can raise a baby okay and things like that. And then I'll just cover some of the political issues, which is our last segment. And there's a lot of different agencies here. And by the way, some of these names are from where I am in California. There are equivalent names in other states and other towns. Like, for example, the regional center is what provides the housing and the other things. Rehab provides things with jobs. The school district will generally provide up to 21 or 22 if you have not graduated. And then the Social Security provides income if you're eligible for that. And then Medicaid will provide things like dental care and medical care and some of the other services. And then the Housing Authority, Housing Commission usually provides the Section 8. There are other sources as well for funding your transition. FAFSA is one you should know about, which will provide student grants and student loans for college to the Department of Education. Of course, there's employment. Sometimes the families pay themselves for different things. There's scholarships. Depends on what it is and what you're eligible for. So I want to conclude with, I think people need to be able to build an adult lives that people with this, the person wants to go with, and be able to someday get good homes in the community and have a social life and be able to have hobbies and friends and a dating life and join the groups that they want to be a part of and be able to make their own decisions and be able to have a life comparable to those without disabilities. And I think as we plan for this, we need to start focusing on building transition with that as a goal. And it can happen, and things like, and so we can make sure that they have a successful journey from high school to adulthood, and do this and plan for things, plan for a future. Does anybody have any questions for me?
Yeah, we have quite a few people with us live, so this is a good time for you guys to ask questions of Stephen. I'll be putting together some training notes, and I'll give you some resources like Cheryl had asked about assessments, and we'll put some other links in there about person-centered planning, some post-secondary college opportunities. So you have some resources that you can go to. So just type the word or the name Stephen in the comments, and we can get those.
I don't see the comments, so
I know. So let me bring up these other ones. So let's see. Well, Cheryl was the one that asked about the assessments. So she said, thank you for your input there with the assessments. And if you have questions, go ahead and post them. So Beth McDonald 4 thought you would like this. So, so I think Natasha is sharing this with Beth. So thanks, Natasha. If you have other people that you know would enjoy this, let them know about the video. The replay will be up right as soon as we end the broadcast. So encourage friends to come back and watch the replay. Yeah. You can always type in questions later and I'll respond, or ask Stephen for a response if I'm not sure of what the answer is.
Yeah.
So Stephen is more than willing to answer any questions. Jennifer's here and she says, hi, so great to catch this. My girl just started high school, so this is very helpful.
Thanks, Jennifer. I think that your girl can have a successful transition in the upcoming years.
Exactly.
What else did somebody else Stephen,
Yeah,
you
so
have
Greta says, Stephen,
I'm not there yet, but what is one of my goals, Greta? One of my goals is to find the right person and someday get there. I think I'm going to get close at some point. I've had to learn a lot of skills and things like that. A lot of people forget about that, and I think people need to understand that we should not assume that people with disabilities are asexual automatically, and that's a common misconception. So, anybody else have a question?
Jana says, thanks. My son just graduated from high school and will begin transition program called Project Search.
Never heard of Project. I've heard of it, but I don't know a lot about it. Might be something specific to that region, but I imagine it's probably one of the after high school transition programs. I'd not sure what school district you're in, Shane, so I'd have to look that one up a little more.
Yeah, and Jennifer, that's her daughter's just starting to high school. She says, what should we do to start?
I will answer that, Jennifer. The first thing you want to do is to let people do what they're capable of and not just assume that someone can't do something, a class, because they have a disability. Instead, I recommend trying to do as much as you can for credit. That's going to open doors. If a person is capable of a diploma, that's even more power to them. And then again, pick some academic classes and pick some electives that person likes. And of course, see what your graduation requirements are and try to do that if you can. I realize not everybody's capable of that, but you won't know until you try. And then the next thing is to think about what kinds of things the person would like to do after and start planning for possible pathways through this, and to realize that things you do in high school can impact your early years of adulthood, and to understand that things, and to really think about and let your child expand and rebel a tad. And I know a lot of times we've shielded them, but I recommend in high school also to make sure they get a chance to go to some of the after school things like games and sports and stuff. Well, I will answer your second question, Jennifer. Loves computers, but they want to offer skills. We don't want that. First of all, one of the things under IDEA law you have is access to the general ed curriculum. It does not matter what subject. So if someone wants computer stuff, like, for example, computer programming or computer science. Actually, my undergrad degree is in computer science, by the way, or technology, or some of those classes. You have access to enroll your girl in those classes. You have access to enroll them in almost any and every class offered at that high school under the IEP. So you could say we don't want office skills. She wants to go a different career path. Let's take some courses to do that and call another IEP meeting and get that resolved.
Yeah, because within that IEP is her transition plan, and you should be looking at each year in high school what courses that she wants to take. So she is focused on something that will be, that she's interested either in, further education or training, career, when she leaves high school. So yeah, I would, just say I totally agree with Stephen as far as looking at the courses that she can start taking now in high school, because those are going to be things that will lead to careers that she's going to be really excited about. So Greta says, awesome. She's glad that you were here, Stephen. Jan says that Idaho has a program for a certified family home. So some students are choosing that. And also that Project Search is a national program, but there's only one here in Idaho. And Jennifer, if you want to read Jennifer's comment in case people are just listening, Stephen, do you want to read that out loud for people?
Yes, her girl does general classes with some plot time. She was the only one in middle school with Down syndrome as general ed. She picked computer courses and photography as electives, so we supported that too. But come high school, they want to do self-contained classes. We said no. She will be the only one with Down syndrome and general ed. That is, you're making the right decision there, Jennifer, and I commend you for that. And we need to realize that sometimes if you keep marginalizing people when they get to high school, I'm very concerned that we've historically have trained them for these entry-level careers, and yet these jobs are going away. If she continues on the computer track, chances are she'll be able to get a decent job in that field.
Right, yeah. Well, Stephen, I want to thank you so much. Barb is here also, so let's show her comment. She says, Charmaine, you and Stephen have provided a wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much. So thanks for being here with us, Barb.
Thanks, Barb.
And I will also put in the training notes a link to a previous appearance on our show that Stephen did when Stephen talked about the hidden curriculum. And that video also, I think you would be interested in. So I'll make sure I put that in the link. So if you want those training notes, just type just the name, his first name, Stephen, in the chat box, and we will get those out to your email box come Tuesday morning. So Stephen, thank you again. I have a goal that more of my guests on our weekly show will be students or adults with disabilities, so we can hear their voice versus as a parent, I have a whole different perspective than what my son's life is really like. And I need to make sure my son is the one and that is directing what his life wants to be, what he wants his life to be. So I know you have a strong advocate for a mother, and that's made a difference, but she's also allowed you to take the path that you've wanted in your future.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, thank you for being here. And Stephen's just finishing up his first year for his PhD at Chapman University in California. So I think you said that your class is winding up. So that's good. You get a little bit of a break before fall semester.
Yeah, my mom's going to take me to Washington and to Canada.
How fun. I know. That's what my husband and I are looking at. Like, can we go to British we want to go to British Columbia soon. So we're
Yeah.
trying to see if we can squeeze in a vacation there. So
Okay.
thank you again. And if you are new to our show, know that we do this once a week, every Thursday at noon Mountain Time. And I am Charmaine Tanner, from the founder of Collaborative Special Education Advocacy. And I hope that you will tune in again. So take care.
Sounds good.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And we're off.